Hello, everyone. Welcome to part 3, the final part of Tony and I's Band of Brothers discussion, which inadvertently has kicked off a brand new series called War Stories, which you can thank Analog Toys and Tony for that name and everything like that. Tony, how are you, sir?
I'm doing very well. I am cracking up at Jason Anderson's comment. He says here, Conan, what is best in life? To ban Brian Dillingham, to try and unban him, and hear the lamentations of the live chat. Michael, you have frozen. How is everyone else doing tonight? This is not how we planned Band of Brothers Part 3 to go. So hopefully Michael returns shortly. The Canuck, thank you very much for the super chat. Started collecting Valaverse action figures. That's how I found you, Analog Toys. Had been subbed to Retro Blasting for a while now. Not really watched anything though. Never heard of this show until today. Wow. Well, you have to go back and watch the first 2 parts. So what we did, and Michael's back.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. I kept the show going.
Keep going.
Well, I read out a super chat.
Nice.
So the Canuck with his $10 super chat. So basically, he found my channel through Valaverse Action Force figure reviews. Had been subbed to Retro Blasting for a while. Never heard of this show until today. Well, I was just saying he needs to go back and watch the first 2 parts. Or is he saying he's never heard of Band of Brothers? Or
well, then absolutely he should watch Band of Brothers. It's incredible. He also gave us another super chat. Thank you so much. He says, is this how the Sergeant Rock comics got started? Were they based on these real life heroes? I mean, Sergeant Rock is in part based on World War II. So in that sense, it's inspired by World War II and the rifle squads in the ground war in Europe, I believe. So, yeah. Brian Dillingham sends a Dillinghamism now with Kung Fu action Dillinghamism. Yes, Bobby, I did manage to fix the toilet. The car is still at the dealership. Tac Toys with Film, thank you for the super chat. He says, Michael and Tony, is there a fictional character you'd like to see guest star in Valaverse Action Force?
Tony? Fictional character?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I know Stone Cold Steve Austin is like a real person, but in my mind, all wrestlers are fictional characters.
Right.
And I know that's what Bobby wants. Bobby's a huge fan, so I'll say Stone Cold Steve Austin.
And likewise, Kylie Minogue is technically not fictional, but I would love her to be in Action Force as an Australian sniper.
Yeah.
All right. So here we are, third part of our Band of Brothers discussion. These are the last 3 episodes, if I recall.
Yeah.
And I'm going to get this order right. It's The Last Patrol, Why We Fight, and Points.
Yeah.
Okay. So Tony, kick us off with the beginning of The Last Patrol and what this episode is about.
Well, first of all, obviously, Easy Company have just come through the Battle of the Bulge. They're moving into a town called Hagenau, which is on a river. And the episode is seen through the eyes of Private Webster, who was injured. I think he was shot in the leg during the operation in episode 5, Crossroads. So basically, he missed all of Bastogne in the Battle of the Bulge because he was away at hospital recuperating. So I thought it was very well done that they chose to write this episode and have it be seen through Webster's eyes, because you see him basically returning to Easy Company and it's just not the same company. He sees them all on the back of the truck. They're all battle weary. They're dirty. But the main thing, so many people are missing.
Yeah.
Mark Pinkella have died. Joe Toy, Garnier have lost their legs. Hubler's dead. Buck Compton is no longer with the company. It's not the same group of guys that he left in Holland.
Right.
Yeah, and they're situated in this town. They're on one side of the river. The Germans are on the other side, and we get introduced to Tom Hanks's son.
Yes.
He arrives with Webster as Lieutenant Henry Jones.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, nepotism is a very real thing in Hollywood, and Band of Brothers was not accepted from that. So, yes, Tom Hanks, executive producer's son, has a starring cameo role in this particular episode. One of the things I have always lived that I've carried with me, I guess is the right thing to say, about that beginning scene in this episode is how they treat Webster almost like a stranger when he shows back up. They know him, they acknowledge who he is, but they just say outright, you weren't with us there. You were sitting pretty in a hospital somewhere and milking your time. You weren't. And he's like, I had physical therapy. I had this, I had that. And they're like, well, Garnier went AWOL from the hospital to make sure he was with us. And so other people, jumped ship to be with us when it counted. And
Popeye as well did it.
Yeah. You, on the other hand, nope, you didn't do it. And in interviews with some of those guys, they talk about how the ones who somehow missed Bastogne because of injuries sustained before, they said, yeah, you kind of walked back into a situation where you were treated like a replacement. I mean, even though you'd been with him since the beginning, you suddenly had to prove yourself again. And you were never going to be part of that group anymore. And also, you don't think about it till you see Malarkey finally get a hot water shower and you realize how long it's been, and his uniform is so rotten at this point that it might as well just be burned for rags. And giving them brand new uniforms and stuff, just you take that kind of stuff for granted because you're watching a TV show. But in reality, I cannot imagine, changing the same 3 pairs of socks for a month and a half and living in literally in a muddy hole with the same clothes on for 6 weeks or whatever the hell it was. Really, really eye-opening. The way they paced and structured those few moments. I want to call a super chat here. Thank you, Toy Connections. He says, good to see you both. Ordered a few custom Star Wars figures thanks to both of your recommendations. I hope you enjoyed them, sir. I really do. Breeze No Ain'ts. Thank you for the super chat. He says, Kylie Minogue / Desert Rack 2-pack for Series 4. I would buy that in a heartbeat.
So would I.
And I think we're caught up on super chat. So I have a clip here from the very beginning of that episode. It's toward the beginning that you sent me, Tony, where Winters discovers a little bit of news about his own situation coming out of Bastogne. So here we go.
Colonel Sink's a bit unhappy with the appearance of your uniform. He says it's not befitting to your rank.
All clears.
Congratulations, Major.
So Winters is now a major. He's been promoted. Boom. Tony, what is that? What is the magnitude of that in an army hierarchy, military hierarchy? When you hit major, I mean, he was already Captain Winters, but when you're given major, I mean, I know it's slightly different in the British lineup, but just in general,
Typically, it's like 3 to 4 years between promotions. And when you think at Camp Toccoa, he was a first lieutenant, became a second lieutenant just before D-Day. So this is, 8 months, 9 months after D-Day? And he's gone from second lieutenant to captain to major. That is normally a 8 to 10 year kind of journey for an officer, be it the British military, the US military. It's staggering. I mean, I'm sure there are a lot more examples of this happening in World War II, but it's testament to who the man was and that the military recognized that. It's a really remarkable feat. survive 9 months in the European theatre of World War II, but then to perform the way he's done. And technically, he has actually been performing the role of a major since Crossroads. He just hasn't had the official promotion. So yeah, he's now battalion commander. You know, an Easy Company is just one of the companies at his. I wouldn't say at his disposal. He would never say that.
Yeah.
But, you know, he's got Dog Company, Fox Company, Easy Company. They all come under the one battalion. So
right. So we have Webster show up in the back of a truck, hops out. He's ready to help everybody. Kind of, you know, I guess he's ready to pitch in, whatever you want to call it. And he finds himself relegated psychologically by everybody else to a basically replacement status. And in a way, the only person that he's really allowed to rub shoulders with is Tom Hanks's son, who's just shown up as a fresh-faced lieutenant from West Point, has no combat experience whatsoever. And if I recall, keep me honest here, he's there to get combat experience, but he's not intended to be there very long because they're going to put him on some command staff or something like that. Isn't that right?
Well, that's what ends up happening. I don't know if that is the intent, but there's a really funny moment between him and Nixon. So they arrive at, like, you know, the company CP, which is this, you know, this bombed out house, and Lipton's suffering with malaria and he's laying on a couch, and Lieutenant Henry Jones comes in with Webster, and they're talking about getting Webster assigned, and Nixon's like, "Oh, Lieutenant Jones, our West Pointer, when did you graduate?" And he says, "June 6th." And he's like, "June 6th of last year?" And he just sort of lets out a tiny little giggle, and he's like, "Don't get hurt."
Right. Yeah.
It's a wonderful little moment. He's just like, yeah.
And he is in the show, he's the son of some top brass guy, if I recall.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, so they're treating him, even though he's not throwing his weight around, the politics of it are, if anything happens to this kid under our watch, you know, that's going to be bad. So they get wind of Webster and Lieutenant Jones. Is it a coincidence they called him Henry Jones?
Henry Jones was a real guy from
okay, because
he was a real guy. He joined them there. So yeah,
I was just wondering, was Spielberg involved? I'm like,
yeah,
but
well, and being Tom Hanks's son, technically, is he Henry Jones Jr.?
Right? Yeah. See, yeah. Jim Largo, thank you for the super chat. He says, "Thanks, gentlemen. This is an excellent series. What life lessons do you both take away from Band of Brothers?" Tony, I'll let you field that one first.
Well, I mean, I think I talked about this in our first live stream about this, that I saw this week by week in late 2001. And then the following year, or later the following year, I went on to Special Forces selection. So the life lessons that I took away were I would march around the hills, and I would kind of have this in my head and thinking, you know, this selection is tough, but no one's actually shooting at you. And I would often, you know, in the days when I wanted to give up, I'm thinking, would Garnier give up? Would Winters give up? And I really drew a lot of inspiration in that I could. You'd be amazed what human beings can actually go through and survive. So yeah.
I always take away from it the fact that you can lead with honor and not with fear, and you can lead with integrity and not through lies and deceit, and you don't have to throw your weight around to inspire people to do the right thing.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm looking at that through a 1940s lens, and this is 2022, and a lot of things have changed. So I don't know, but I'd like to think that that's still true. And also, I think the other important thing that I always take away from it reaffirms my philosophy that you always lead from the front, that you don't lead from the back. And Winters always led from the front until he was forcibly made to lead from the back. But even then, he had proven himself to those men that they knew he wasn't full of crap. They were like, even though he's now a captain that's not allowed to be out front, he was out front with us even when he didn't have to be. And I think that's huge. If you're referring to my battle dress jacket, Knights of Old, they didn't make people my size back in the war. Original battle dress is all very small. Those guys were far more compact and not as tall as I was. And also, when you respect history, you don't buy an antique uniform and wear it as an everyday garment. And you especially don't wear an actual uniform garment from somebody who earned all that stuff. You know, I just enjoy the style of the jackets, and I don't patch them up or anything. I'm not a sergeant. I am not a private. I'm just a guy, and I just like wearing these coats. So there you go.
Because they're cool.
They're cool. They're great. They're awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're some of the best things I've ever worn. Okay, so I said so again. I got to get over that. All right. They quickly determined, Webster and Lieutenant Jones, that the missions have been going across the river to try and bring back German prisoners. They want a German prisoner or German prisoners alive to get intelligence on what the Germans have on the other side of the river as far as defenses and numbers and strength and everything like that. And this starts to become a kind of back and forth where Lieutenant Jones eagerly wants to, he's not like some of the people we've seen in like the Replacements episode or in other episodes where they naively think that war is glamorous. He never treats it that way. He's a decent guy, but he wants combat experience and he wants to lead the patrol. And of course, understandably, Winters and, Spears and everybody else, Martin, they're all like, no, like, you've never done this. You've never been in combat. You've never even done a paradrop. Like, we can't let you do this. We can't let this happen. What happens next? I'm a little fuzzy sometimes on the sequence of events because if I recall, they eventually relent, but I can't remember why.
So they eventually decide to let Lieutenant Jones go on the mission because the experience would be good, but they don't let him lead the mission. Now, initially, it's going to be Donald Malarkey leading the mission. And at this point, Donald Malarkey is one of the very few Toccoa men who has been on the front line consistently all the way through. He's never been injured. He's never been taken off the front line. And you mentioned before the shower scene. There's a brief moment in that where Donald Malarkey is standing under the hot shower and he has that 1,000-yard stare. He's a broken man. He's traumatized by the events of the war. And when some of the privates in Easy Company are kind of discussing amongst themselves about they can't let Jones do it, he's got no experience, and one of them says like, oh yeah, let's have Malarkey run it. He only lost his 5 best friends. What's he got to live for? So a decision, quite a smart decision, gets made to not let Malarkey go on the mission because of how much he's been through, and then they eventually give it over to Sergeant Martin, who is played by one of my a personal favorite actor of mine, English guy, does a lot of directing. We mentioned it in the last show, and I couldn't remember his name. Do you remember his name?
I can't either. He's a great actor, and he co-stars in the Some Kind of Bliss music video with Kylie Minogue. So there you go.
Yeah, I'm sure someone in the chat's going to tell us. So they end up planning to go across the river in some boats at night under cover of machine gun fire, and Yeah, and basically go into a building. And one other thing we should, I suppose, point out here is you've got the guy who normally works in like the PX. You know, he's the one who mails all of the spoils of war back home and stuff. And you know, he hasn't seen any action. And I think he goes up and he asks Captain Spears or someone like, "Please, can I go? Like, you know, the war's nearly over. I've never got to do anything." And they're like, "Oh, yeah, he can go along." Probably wasn't the best idea, but
no, because he doesn't know how to handle. He does something really. Doesn't he get overly aggressive with a German prisoner or something like that? He gets over aggressive with that. It reminded me as the polar opposite, but same scenario. If we go back to Day of Days, and there was the Jeep driver that wanted to come along when they take Brecourt, and he's with Garnier, and he can't even hit a German that's only a few yards away, and then Garnier's like, "Jesus Christ, Jeep jockey," and then he has to kill the German himself. But that guy wasn't unhinged. This guy clearly doesn't have the mental chops to handle being in a stressful situation or being in a combat situation. So they eventually get approval for Jones to go. Webster kind of convinces Martin or Malarkey and well, first they tell Malarkey, "We'll go in your place," or something like that, or you guys don't have to go. Like you guys need a break. And I remember Webster having a conversation like that. And so then Martin goes with Lieutenant Jones going only to observe or something like that. He's only meant to, in other words, he's not really in command. It's Martin.
No, he's not in command. He's going for the experience, and Sergeant Martin is leading the mission. Yeah, and they cross the river at night, and it's deemed a successful mission, even though basically that when they get to the farmhouse, one of the privates, he pulls the pin on his grenade, throws it through the door, and then with the adrenaline pumping, he charges up the stairs and runs in before the grenade goes off, and he actually frags himself with his own grenade.
Right. Yeah. He like you said, his adrenaline was running and he wasn't thinking straight, and he made all the wrong moves. And Lieutenant Jones is given a whistle, and they tell them on the dinghies or the boats where they have the machine gun cover set up on the shore. They say, "Blow the whistle when you need us to help you get out. We'll open up when you blow the whistle." And because everything opens up early on the German side of things, they can't hear the whistle at first. And I have this scene right here where Liebgott is waiting to hear the whistle, and it doesn't go exactly as planned.
Jesus Christ, come on, blow the goddamn whistle!
They get everybody back. They have a few prisoners, so it's considered a successful patrol. And then the next morning, Colonel Sink is feeling, as they say in the South, he's feeling his oats. He's got his chest puffed up. And they find out that he's been bragging to the top brass about his successful mission of getting these German prisoners. And he immediately orders another foray over the river that night to go get more people. And there's this conversation that Winters and Nixon have, staring over the river into the German side of the combat zone. And let me see if I can just find it here. Here it is.
So he knows we lost a man?
Yeah, he knows. He also knows you picked up 2 prisoners who talked.
About what?
OB, supply trouble, Hitler's favorite color. I don't know. None of it gets us across the river.
Everybody's admitting, who's not the colonel, that these Germans don't know anything that important. Like we're risking our lives and guys are getting killed for what? And there is a discussion right after that where I think it's Nixon says to Winters, or it was either right before or right after that line where he says, yeah, Colonel Sink's been on the phone all day with the top brass, just talking about how successful this has been. And so now he's going for bragging rights at this point. Fun side note is that in the actual history of this, which is not dissimilar to this episode, Major Winters stated in his memoirs that when he received the order from Colonel Sink to do the second mission the second night, he received that order from a drunk Colonel Sink. And he said, first of all, it makes no tactical sense to go back over there a second night. We're not going to be getting anything that important. Secondly, it's just risking men, even though we knew the war was going to be over soon. This is just an unnecessary risk. And I can't rely on the assurance of the order itself because it came from an inebriated officer. And Tony, what is the malleability of interpreting or disregarding? I know 99.9% of the time you can't disregard an order, but are there times in the combat zone where you can interpret or make your own, battlefield decision?
Yes, certainly. It's not uncommon for a small unit commander to, he'll receive orders from up above, he'll deliver those orders, and you go out onto the operation, and then, you have a private conversation with your troops, and it's like, right, we're gonna make out that we're doing this, but we're not actually doing it.
Right.
But in a scenario like this, in back in World War II, desertion and not following orders, this was a capital crime.
Yeah.
By not, even though Winters is making his own interpretation, he is still risking himself, standing in front of the firing squad, to do this. But it's one of those, if these men did not already respect Winters enough, this would have just elevated and nobody ever would have said a word. Why in the hell would you?
Yeah.
I also think that when Major Winters goes into the, he's into the house and he's briefing his men. He's basically the same plan as last night, except it's going to be, 1 o'clock instead of midnight or whatever. That whole scene with Damian Lewis, that is one of the best pieces of acting in the entire series, which is already full of amazing acting. The way he delivers that, and it's just like the very final kind of, he's looking down at the map and he looks up and half an eyebrow and he's like, understand?
Yeah. It's like he knows, and his men they're all beyond friends, beyond beyond military subordinates and commanders. They've been through so much together that he has absolute trust in them, and they have trust in him, that when he says, this is what we're going to say this time, guys, he knows that not one of those guys is going to rat him out, and or vice versa. He's not going to screw them over either. And I have an edited version of that moment that you just described here, so that we can see it.
Good, because I want you all to get a full night's sleep tonight. Which means in the morning, you will report to me that you made it across the river into German lines. We're unable to secure any live prisoners.
And then he says, he has that very long pregnant moment. And then he says, understand? And they all say, yes. And then he leaves. And you can see the tension in the room just wash away, where all of them realize, we're not putting our lives on the line tonight like we have every night for the last 3-4 months, whatever it's been. We actually get a legitimate reprieve from this. It's a staggering thing to realize that, through the eyes of, the episode's through the eyes of Webster, but we see combat fatigue, and I don't mean the PTSD version, but the general combat fatigue, the 1,000-yard stare. We see that through Malarkey. We see that through people observing Malarkey and him being more than willing to let Webster and Jones go in his stead, and being more than willing to let Martin, go. And also he's probably 5,000% behind Winter's plan at this point. He's the last person that's going to rat anybody out. And, in his memoirs, Winters does say, yeah, I did that. I did that for the sake of the men, and I did it because the order made no sense. And it came from a drunk colonel. So, and as Winters has a very specific relationship throughout this miniseries and in his real life with alcohol, as someone who abstains from it, I'm sure he's totally going to disregard an order from a drunk officer. Like, there's no respect there. So I'm not doing that. We have some super chats here real quick. Keith Knight, thank you for the super chat. He says, hello, gents. Loving this series. Question for Trooper Rat. Have you ever served under a Sobel? I've had one or two in my time with the Met.
Yes, but not in the special forces. People like that do not make it through. 'Cause even officers have to do selection. It's actually selection for them is a little bit tougher. They've got some added mental pressure. But in the regular army, I've had one or two Sobels in my time.
Werewolf by lunchtime. Thank you for the kind super chat. He says, I've never taken life for granted, having learned what people went through for our freedom. I honestly cannot imagine the hell. And it's like when you're growing up and there's those kids that are like, I don't know what my parents say about drugs is true. I got to try it for myself. And it's like, I was sitting over there going, I don't. I'm pretty sure that's not like taking a Flintstones vitamin. All right. Like I can read between the lines here. And similarly with war, I've never romanticized combat. I've always seen it as a necessary evil and something to learn about and respect, but I've never seen it as this cool thing. Side story on that topic, Werewolf, is that I don't know if I've ever told you this story, Tony. It's real short. One time we went to a World War II Heritage Day here in a town nearby called Kennesaw. And it was hosted at a small local history museum. And they had the reenactors come out because it was supposed to be so like kids could show up on the weekend and people in uniforms could talk about World War II and the equipment and all that kind of stuff. So it had a good intention. But there was a disproportionate number of guys who were there as German Fallschirmjäger. Like they were there to be German para. And they were from, you could tell, a reenactment group. But I was talking with some of the individuals there. There were British reenactors there, and American, of course. And they came up to me, and I don't remember how the discussion got started, but they said these guys in German uniforms were like, "Hey," they said, "we heard you do videos." Now this was before retroblasting. This was 2 or 3 years before retroblasting. And I was like, yeah, I know how to do videos. And they said, "Would you do a promo reel for our reenactment group?" They called it their platoon or something like that. I was like, "Oh, really?" But I said, I said, "What are you looking for?" They said, "Well, we just want a lot of really cool shots of us shooting guns." And I'm like, I just don't think these guys have the right mindset for this. I don't think their head is in the right space when it comes to living history. Like that was my taste. That's why I said in one episode of this that I'm not a reenactor.
You were possibly approached there to make a piece of propaganda.
It was like, we got these machine guns and the MP40s and or MG42s, and just get a lot of cool shots, and put some rock music over it. I of course never did it and never contacted them. So anybody who goes
music over it,
it was they thought they were just living this ultimate fantasy, and I'm like, guys, I would have more respect for you if you were like Dungeons and Dragons LARPers at this point. This is embarrassing. Scuba Pete, thank you for the super chat. He says, finally get to catch this stream. Michael, have you been to the Gettysburg Museum to see the Dick Winters exhibit? No, but I will go now that I know it's there. Absolutely will go. That'd be great.
Yeah, I've seen some videos on YouTube. When Dick Winters passed away, a massive part of his collection went to that museum. It's quite impressive. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I need to go check that out for sure. I haven't been to Gettysburg in quite a long time, so I should probably make the pilgrimage and go back. So they get their rest, and then in the morning, Lieutenant, we assume it's in the morning. It could be a few days later. It's hard to tell, but Lieutenant Jones has been posted somewhere else, and he's leaving. And I believe it's he and Winters have a nice goodbye, like a respectful, good luck wherever you're going, Lieutenant.
Yeah. Well, just kind of going backwards a few steps. We were talking earlier about the guy from the PX who, couldn't really handle the
the prisoners. That's right.
The prisoners, yeah. So when they kind of get back into the building and they're in the basement there, they've got the private who's fragged himself with his own grenade, and this guy works normally in the PX. He's freaking out and he pulls a pistol and he goes to shoot one of the German prisoners, and it's actually Henry Jones who steps in, drags him away, and he's like, "We're not going back across that river to get another prisoner because you shot one." And I think it's that moment there that, word obviously gets up to Winters or Spears or whoever that, hey, actually, when the situation got really tense, this guy actually performed under pressure. And they went, okay, you've got your combat experience. Now off you go up to battalion. And he I think he goes into some executive officer type role. So,
yeah. What I'm saying, Anselin, is that they weren't reenacting in the sense that they thought it was all fun and games and they thought it was really cool. That's what I'm saying. They weren't taking it with the living history gravitas that I've seen in real reenacting groups like the Cheshire Home Guard and other people like that. They didn't have, much like the private in the quartermaster's office didn't have the mental chops to be in combat. These guys don't have the right mentality to be living history reenactors. Make sense? All right.
Yeah.
Salvador, thank you for the super chat. He says, love you both. Thanks for everything. And thank you, sir, for what you do.
Thank you, Sal.
Yeah.
Just to touch on that again, what you were just talking about, to me, it's like, you have a conversation with someone, as you say, who doesn't have the mental chops, and when they learn some way or another that, I've been in the military, I've served overseas, because, it's weird. In my place of work, I can meet a person who I kind of know of them, they know of me, we've never met at work, and then we meet and they've already been told, like, oh, he's this ex-special forces guy, and they have some sort of perception of me. But anyway, sometimes you can end up in these really weird conversations with people who, don't have the right mentality. And a very extreme example is, I've honestly in my life, I've had people go, so is it really like Call of Duty, or how is it different to Call of Duty? And you're like, it's not. If you think because you can play Call of Duty really well, you would have made a good soldier, you should never, ever go near a recruitment office. You should just be banned from even going in one.
Yes. Yeah. It's somebody that goes there wants to serve their country, and or they want to better themselves in some way. They have a more, I don't want to say necessarily noble pursuit in every respect, but it's a nobler pursuit than just, I'm going to go be a hero. It's not about that.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it was, I had already been in the Australian Army for 4 years, discharged, became a civilian again, and decided to re-enlist after September, the events of September 11, 2001. But the reason when I re-enlisted this time in the British military, I wanted to go special forces. My reason for doing so is I wanted to learn who I really was. That was my sole thing. It wasn't to go and be a hero or anything like that.
Right.
maybe a little bit of like an Ernest Hemingway kind of thing. It's like I wanted to know. You watch a show like Band of Brothers, and I'm like, would I be a Sobel or would I be a Winters? I wanted to know.
Yeah, you're testing yourself. You're testing yourself. Yeah, in the ultimate way. I think Winston Churchill wrote about that when he was in the army, and I want to say it was either the Boer War or
World War I think.
Yeah, it might have even been prior to World War I. It was some service I think he did somewhere in Africa, and he talked about, the first time you feel bullets whiz by your head. He goes, that's a sensation that you can't describe to anybody, but it's also oddly adrenaline inducing, where that now your life is on the line, and all this kind of stuff. But it's testing yourself. Will I crack under that pressure, or will I perform?
Yeah.
Thank you for the kind message, Octobers. I'm drinking carbonated water. One moment. To answer your question, sir, the BAR and the M1928 Thompson are hero grade movie prop replicas, because I don't want to jump through the FBI hoops to have these weapons, and I don't have the tens of thousands of dollars it will require. But this M1 Garand is an actual 1943 Winchester made M1 Garand. It is a Winchester make M1 Garand from 1943. It's one of my pride and joys, and it has all the proper sights and everything on it for World War II, single slot gas plug, everything like that. All right. Well, I guess we're moving over into why we fight at this point, even though we haven't discussed this episode too terribly long. And I always felt like, even though all the episodes, they're not all the exact same length, but they all kind of fall within a certain length. And
they're all approximately an hour.
Yeah, the last patrol always did feel like a bridge episode to the last two. It was kind of this is a thing that happened in Easy Company, and we kind of need to talk about it, but the real meat of the end of their experience is one step away. So we're now in Why We Fight. And if I can't remember if Why We Fight starts on the back of the truck, or it starts on in the woods. I can't remember.
No, it actually starts with some of the Easy Company guys. They're in a bombed out building, so they're like on a second or third floor,
right?
But all the walls taken out, basically, and they're watching German civilians piling up bodies of the dead, and they're listening.
That's right.
Violin. But that clip is actually from the end of the episode, and they come back to it, and there's a moment in there where I think someone says, is that Mozart? And then Nixon's like, no, it's Beethoven. Which I believe is a bit of a nod to a line in Schindler's List, where something very similar happens in Schindler's List, where they get corrected on the composer. But a very, very powerful episode, Why We Fight. So the first thing that you'll sort of really notice about the start of the episode is that we are through the winter now. We are into spring, kind of going into summer in Germany, and the guys look, well equipped again, clean uniforms, and they even talk. There's another replacement, O'Connor. I can't remember his name because Piconti never remembers his name. But they get paired up together.
They're in that, the machine gun post. Sorry, keep going.
Yeah, and he's all enthusiastic, and when am I get to jump into Berlin, and I want to cut off Hitler's mustache, and he starts whistling. She's coming round the mountain, which would drive me insane. And it clearly does with Piconti, because he eventually snaps, and he's like, do you realize that this is the best part of war I've seen? Like, Germany's almost as good as being home.
Yeah.
Roof over my head, real toilet paper, food. So it really shows the difference between the combat vet and particularly the replacements who are coming in towards the end of the war, who, everyone was saying, hey, like, this is going to be over soon. We've almost made it, occupied all of Germany. So an interesting moment. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's pointing out, I've got dry shoes on, I've got dry socks, I'm not freezing to death, I've got a good book I can read. He's just sitting there trying to read a book and just relax. And this guy's playing like he's, Yankee Doodle Dandy, I'm the next, Captain America over here or whatever.
Yeah.
And Picante is just like, dude, give it a rest. Give it a rest. At this point, this is where the flow of this episode gets confusing for me, because I know the things that happen in it, but it's very difficult for me to pinpoint how and when these things occur. I know there's the sequence where they're all in the back of the truck and Luz starts reading the Stars and Stripes paper, and they're like, what are you reading about? And he's like, well, there's an article in here about why we're fighting the Germans. And they're like, oh, really? Well, tell us why. And he's like, well, the Germans are bad. Like he's kind of, mocking the writer and everything. And as they.
And that's actually a very, very young Tom Hardy who's reading the paper, and Luz is talking to him about.
Right.
Well, it's a very, very young Tom Hardy. And, there's another moment there where they're in the back of that truck driving past, and they go past, and there's some Germans on their knees, and I think it's Polish soldiers just execute them, and that O'Keefe, O'Malley, O'Brien, whoever he is very much like, oh, you can see he's quite startled by it, and the other soldiers are like, whatever. But they do pay particular attention in this episode before, obviously, they discover the camp, which we'll get onto. They pay a lot of attention in this episode to the, is it looting? I don't want to use that word.
Yes, it's where they're, Spears, of course, has been sending huge parcels back full of silverware and candlesticks and all kinds of things. And there's even a moment, I know we're kind of jumping ahead, I think points is where they get to Birch's Garden. We'll talk about that later. But even Welsh and Winters kind of get in on some of that at one point. Winters was even asked multiple times in different interviews how he felt about his men taking things back and looting and everything. And Winters was just like, you know what? These guys, they went through hell on earth like you wouldn't believe. They were lucky to be alive. The Germans started this horrible war. They killed so many people. They stole so many things from all these different countries. He's like, I wasn't going to make an issue out of them, setting up shop in a house or getting a few things for themselves to bring back. He's like, I just didn't care. And I'm like, well, fair, the
spoils of war.
Yeah, exactly. Which become rather what's the word I'm looking for? Prestigious when they get to Birch's Garden. It becomes even a bigger deal. So there's a moment here after we see the Polish soldiers shooting the Germans where I'm trying to remember the flow of this. It's very hard to remember the flow, but Nixon is looking around in this very opulent German house. He's looking for his favorite vintage of bourbon or whiskey or
VAT 69.
Yeah, VAT 68. And he's just hoping to find something comparable. And when he walks in, he finds out he's not alone in this very fancy house. And it's this stern, older German lady. And she was the wife of a high-ranking German officer who has been killed in the war at some point. We don't know where or when, but his picture is in the main, living room with a black ribbon around it. and he's just kind of looking at her, and she's looking at him like, "Get out of my house, you savage." And he's just kind of like, he doesn't really say anything, and he just kind of leaves. And this is all going to come back around later because she's acting very superior and very,
oh yeah, she's looking down her nose at him, with a lot of disdain. But would I be right in remembering that just prior to that, is this the episode where Nixon comes back into town in a Jeep, and the other soldiers see him and they're like, why is he wearing his jump harness? You know, he's got a different chin strap on his helmet, and he's like the only guy to go and do a third combat jump with another battalion or something like that. He jumps out of the plane with one other, and then the plane blows up. So he's having this conversation with Winters about, oh, well, wasn't me. And you can tell he's clearly affected by this, and he has to write all the letters home. And he gets demoted. Winters doesn't demote him. He informs him that he's being demoted because of his alcohol problem. He can't hide it. They all know about it. So he's now on this mission to get hold of some Bat 69. That's all he wants.
Right. Scott Hughes, thank you for the super chat. He says, I want to thank you for giving me the nudge to rewatch this series. Tony, thank you for all carbonated water. Tony, thank you for all that you've done in the service. As a son and grandson of veterans, you couldn't have any greater respect.
Thank you, Scott.
Welcome. You're very welcome. And then Scott Hughes says, want to add, I watched Why We Fight. I wept. Yeah, it's one of the big episodes of Band of Brothers. It's absolutely. And then Movie Oubliette, thank you for being here. He says, yes, and Nixon breaks eye contact with her because he's ashamed. The situation is exactly reversed at the end of the episode when she cannot maintain eye contact with him. It's beautifully acted. Good catch. Good catch. Now I think this is safe to say that we can go to the scene where they're walking around in the woods, because they're kind of on a patrol, just looking around. We played the clip last time where Picante says to Luz, doesn't this remind you of Bastogne? He's like, well, except for the trees exploding and the cold and not having any food. He's like, yeah, it's exactly like Bastogne. And that's when they run into the fencing and they start to figure out what the fencing is, but it immediately cuts to Picante running back to the CP and saying, we found something. You got to come look at this. We don't know what we found. Like, we found this thing. We don't know what it is. And they, of course, discover that it is a in this show, it's a death camp. In reality, what they found was a labor camp. They kind of hybridized the two things, because up in the area of Poland and stuff was when the armor divisions and stuff were finding the actual death camps. Easy Company came across a labor camp, which a lot of people died in those labor camps. We're not going to sugarcoat it or anything like that. But what they were trying to do in this episode is kind of bring some of it together. And there's a sequence that I couldn't find an online clip for that was of decent quality, where when they realized that all these people the Germans just left them there to die, and they find, of course, the train loads full of dead bodies, and they find bodies just laying in pits, and people all crammed up, and they're all emaciated, they're all starving to death, and a lot of them are, of course, Jewish people. They go back into town and they raid all of the bakeries, restaurants, butcher shops, trying to get as much food as they can. And Webster has this encounter with the baker, I believe, who's protesting, why are you taking all my stuff? And he tells him, there's no way you couldn't have known what was going on. You had to have smelled it. You had to have known what was happening. And he's like, I don't know. He's saying in German, I don't know what you're talking about. So then they come back and they start handing out the food to these desperate people. And that's when Colonel Sink shows up with the head medical officer. And they, of course, say, your intentions are good, but we can't do this because we could actually kill these people unless they get proper medical treatment and are weaned back onto solid food properly.
Yeah. They could eat themselves to death. When you're starving that much and you can take all that food, you can rupture your intestines, your stomach.
Right.
This episode, a lot of people will say, it's probably the hardest one to watch. I stand by what I said in a previous one of these live streams, where at the time this was probably the most confronting episode for me. As I look back now, the episode I find the most difficult to watch is the breaking point. Simply because it brings back memories of my own from Iraq. But as I understand it, they got a lot of the extras at the death camp here. They actually got, because you can't make someone look
right,
starved to death and just stretch skin over ribs. They actually had cancer patients and things like that come in to work as extras, and when you kind of know that bit of information as well, it makes me wonder. You had all these people come in, to make these roles and these people look more realistic, and it's just that extra little bit emotional thinking that perhaps a lot of the people who played the parts of the Jewish people in the death camps did not survive many years after the show. It's very difficult. I believe in actual history that Easy Company didn't actually discover the labor camp. It was discovered by another unit. They turned up the following day. But again, it's one of those kind of historical inaccuracies which I'm very comfortable with, because it was important that you can't not talk about the Holocaust when you're talking about the end of World War II in Germany. So the choice to turn it from a labor camp to a death camp and have Easy Company find it, I think it's more important to show people the reality of what that was like than it's one of those times where I really feel like artistic license was well applied to the story.
It's a nuance too, because it gets so complex. Like half of Auschwitz was a labor camp, and then the other half of it was a death camp. So it's like, take your pick, and plenty of people died in the labor camps as well. Like it was no picnic being at a Nazi labor camp. I mean, that wasn't a guarantee of survival. I have the clip here where they're talking to the head of the medical unit, and he's telling them, and then that's when Winters has to tell Joe Liebgott, who speaks German, you're going to have to tell these people that, one, we're going to have to take the food away until we get the medical treatment, and two, we can't take them anywhere. They're going to have to stay here until we arrange transportation and a location to bring them. And Joe Liebgott, who is Jewish, is just like, I can't do that, sir. I can't do it. And then he has to. So here we go.
You want us to lock these people back up?
We got no choice, Nick. Otherwise, they might scatter. We need to keep them centralized so we can supervise their food intake and medical treatments.
Can't tell them that, sir.
Got to, Joe.
Breaking, and yet at the same time, their points are valid, where it's like, if we keep feeding them and they scatter, they are going to die. We've got to do the hard work now in order to save as many lives as we can from this group. I can't imagine running into that. And then later on in this episode, which I wasn't able to find a complete clip from that I was happy with the quality. It's inspired by the story of Eisenhower, if I recall. It's either Eisenhower or I think it's Eisenhower. It might have been, or one of his commanding officers, like Patton or somebody. I want to say it was Eisenhower, though. Forced the local Germans, when they found one of the death camps, they forced the locals to come in and help them bury the bodies and see everything. They forced them to see everything that was going on. And so in this, as Movie Oubliette was just saying, in this episode, Nixon is walking back through the camp, and he spots the woman whose house he went into, and she is now being forced to help bury the bodies of these victims. It's a sobering episode.
Yeah, and obviously, and you know, and the roles are totally reversed because, yeah, when she catches him in his house, you know, he's the one who's ashamed, and now he's looking at her going, Jesus, this is what you were doing, and you know, not her exactly, but you know, your husband would have known about this, and much like Webster's interaction with the local baker, you know, don't tell me that you didn't smell the stench down the road. Yeah.
Knights of Old, thank you for the super chat. He says, my wife's grandpa, French resistance, was freed from one of the camps depicted, Kuffering. USA let them kill guards, and despite being blinded in one eye from abuse, doing so haunted him his whole life. Wow. All right, so what else do we want to say about why we fight before we move on to points?
In preparation for this, I decided to watch Schindler's List for the second time in my life, because I always felt it was a film I didn't need to watch a second time.
Yeah.
And I almost kind of regret watching it again.
Yeah.
It's a very, very unpleasant film. A film that, you know, I'm pleased was made. But yeah, I don't think that Schindler's List, when it comes to the Holocaust, is obviously a lot more powerful. But having seen that, to be honest, I think I watched Schindler's List for the first time probably only about 8 years ago. I never watched it back in the 90s. I hadn't seen it when I watched Band of Brothers. And there was a part of me that was like, you know, you've got to watch this film one day. And don't people in the audience, I'm not one of those guys who's like, oh, I don't want to watch it because it's black and white. I'm not one of those people.
Right.
I actually still enjoy watching black and white episodes of Johnny Weissmuller's Tarzan.
Yeah.
So I'm not one of those. But it surprises me, you know, when you talk about these reenactors, the people who want to reenact as German paratroopers and things. It's like, let's not sugarcoat anything here.
Yeah.
What the Germans did was the most horrendous act of barbarism that we've seen in the last 2 centuries.
Yeah.
It's I'm glad that there is media out there like Band of Brothers and Schindler's List that exists to be able to have a somewhat of a visual record that this did happen.
Yeah.
Would either of these things be made today? I don't think they would be. I actually think it was 20 years, or a bit over 20 years since Band of Brothers came out. I actually think even Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg would have trouble getting Episode 9, Why We Fight, getting that aired today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have this one moment here that I'm so glad I spotted before we moved on. That's part of this episode, and I think it's the most telling, one of the most telling bits in this, where they are going in to Germany as on the Autobahn as the Germans are all being marched out. And, yeah, and the Germans are being marched out in the center of this big roadway. And Webster, who is a Harvard-educated guy, is just blown away by the fact that all of these guys are still using horses to pull wagons, and you know and so he kind of loses it. He kind of wigs out and starts screaming at the Germans.
You stupid fascist pigs! Look at you! You have horses! What were you thinking? That's enough, Webster.
It's longer than that, but it's this punctuated moment where he's just like, why are we here? what are we doing here? Like, why did you do all this? What are we here for? You know, you know, I've always related to that scene with Webster a lot. I really have. Well, now we get to the last episode of Band of Brothers, which is Points. And for those of you who aren't aware, Points, the title is derived from the fact that before we walk away from this episode, there's one major thing we have to discuss.
Yep.
It comes back around and ends on Nixon saying to all the guys, you know, when they say it's Mozart, whatever, and he says, no, it's Beethoven. Yep. And then he says, it was just announced Hitler killed himself last night in his bunker. But the problem with that is that the episode begins April 17th, says the date, and Hitler killed himself on April 30th, right? I went and looked this up. The writer of Band of Brothers has said, go look at the screenplay. It's correct. The screenplay literally is like the next day, accurate to the day of Hitler's suicide. He says, I don't even know how they messed that up. He goes, I have no idea how they messed that up in the producing of the video and the post-production. He goes, I'm still mad about it. He goes, because everybody thinks it was me that screwed that up. He's like, but it wasn't. He's like, it's in the screenplay. And I'm just like, wow. Like, so that's one of the big weird inaccuracies of Band of Brothers, like on the level of Blythe being killed when Blythe survived the war. It's
also one of those, like, you could have corrected it for the Blu-ray release, and you didn't. And
it would have been a very, very inexpensive fix too. It's text. Yeah.
You and I can do it in Adobe Premiere for it.
Yes, we could. Yeah. The same thing with Blythe. Blythe's whole plot hole or inaccuracy could have been fixed in text because they say in text that he died.
Yeah.
Which is like, it's very strange, the decisions they made that they didn't bother to correct. Okay, so now we're in Points. And Points, for those of you who don't know, Points, the title is derived from, they needed, every soldier in the American Army needed a certain amount of points that they earned in order to be eligible to go home. And there were a lot of factors involved. How much time you were in combat versus how much, I don't know, training you'd had versus, I don't even know how it was tallied. It was very strange. The fact that a guy like, the fact that a guy like, oh, sorry, go ahead, Tony.
No, I was just going to say, even the soldiers at the time found it very difficult it was this really awkward mathematical equation they had to try and figure out. And they would get points if they were, I think, married and had children. They would get points for Purple Hearts. There would be all these different things. And they basically, if they had 85 points, that was them. They could go home. And there was still people like Donald Malarkey who could not get 85 points.
Which makes no sense. I mean, it's like, dude, if anybody could have gone home immediately, it should have been Donald Malarkey. And yet nothing. So they're tasked with occupying Berchtesgaden, what some people consider the birthplace of Nazism. And first, there's a road that's kind of taken out. Somebody blasted it. The Germans blasted it and created a cliff obstruction. And there is a concern, of course, about getting there first before. I think was it the Russians they were worried about getting there, or was it the French? That's right, the French. So they arrive in Berchtesgaden and they immediately set up their CP for Colonel Sink in what looks like the main German command, banquet hall, Hofbrau, whatever you want to call it. And that's when we have this little moment here where, and it's true to history, where Winters and Harry Welsh split Hitler's silverware. which is right here.
Kitty would love this. How many brides get a wedding present from Hitler?
So to Winter's dying day, he and his wife were still using his half of that silverware. Which, why wouldn't you? They also, as they start to occupy they occupy the Eagle's Nest. They occupy all these different hot spots that were part of the upper crust Nazi commanders' personal playgrounds. And one of them happens to be the home of Hermann Goering. And true to history, when Winters and his men discovered Hermann Goering's house, they put a guard on it so that nobody else could get in before he could bring back Nixon, so that Nixon could go in there first. And the reason that they wanted Nixon to go in there first...
10,000 bottles of the world's finest liquor, wine, and champagne helped Easy Company mark the day the war in Europe came to an end.
So they were drinking out of Hitler's liquor cabinet at Berchtesgaden, and they were raiding Goering's liquor collection in his house. I do think that makes Winters on a certain level an enabler, but I say that very sarcastically in regards to Nixon's condition. Different time. But I love the moment where, and I don't think I have a clip from it, but I love the moment where they're all sitting on the balcony at the Eagle's Nest, looking out over the Alps, and I think it's the Alps, if I'm not mistaken. And Harry Welsh is like, come on, Major. He's like, just have one drink with us to celebrate the end of the war. Just, because they've surrendered. They've announced a surrender. And he doesn't say anything. And then he just starts reading the order. Like, he's just like, look, I'm glad you guys are having a good time. I don't drink alcohol. Like, I don't know how many times I have to tell you, I'm not going to drink right now, which I thought was pretty interesting.
Yeah. And that's when that's the moment when he says to him, the German army surrendered. Happy VE Day, and they're like, VE Day, and he's like, victory in Europe. Could you very quickly pull up DKG Customs comment here?
Sure.
He was in a live chat earlier. This is one of the people who did some special effects work on the actual show.
Okay, wow.
And he's listening to us too talk about.
I know it's very humbling in a odd kind of way. I'm humbled beyond belief that a special
as am I, DKG Custom. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, seriously, it's such a the thing that I love about Band of Brothers is, even though it's 20 years old now, or almost 20 years old, or right at 20 years old, the special effects were handled with such finesse and such discretion. They were all so atmospherically done in order to enhance rather than call themselves out. That even to this day, 95% of them 100% of them hold up just fine. 95% of them are still invisible. Like, it's still just like, is that an effect?
And the most, I suppose, the most invisible effect of them all, which I only learnt about recently, is all of those scenes in Bastogne. We were talking in the last episode that it was filmed on a soundstage. Those actors claim that they would have these, big winter coats on. They would have nothing on underneath, and they would actually be sitting in these foxholes pretending to shiver while they were sweating their asses off.
Yeah.
All of the what do you call it? Not, when you breathe in cold air and
the vapor.
That is all CGI.
Wow.
Through both two episodes is CGI.
Wow.
I only learned of that recently, and it's like, man, you would never ever pick up on that.
Well, Hollywood very rarely. I think only with Lawrence of Arabia, as far as the desert goes, and then I believe maybe like the Thing, and definitely in The Empire Strikes Back on Hoth for the cold. Those are some of the only examples I can really think of where it wasn't the opposite of what they needed to accomplish. In other words, most of the time when you're shooting for winter, they schedule it in the dead of summer. So it becomes even harder. Like It's a Wonderful Life was scheduled like right in the middle of the summer. So all that snow and everything is just, and they're trying to not sweat themselves to death in scarves and winter coats, but look like they're cold. And then a lot of times when it's supposed to be really hot, it's like freezing. I don't know how Hollywood always messes that up, but they do. In this case, of course, it was soundstage work, which makes it even more difficult because it's always going to be hot on a soundstage for sure. Scalehanger 82 or 182. Thank you for the super chat. It says, love your content, guys. Keep the videos coming. We shall, sir. We shall. Stop saying 20 years old. Makes me feel old. He says, yep, the invisible effects were a big thing for us. You'd probably not realize some of them were there. You don't. You really don't. And 20 years old, my friend, if I may call you my friend, is not old. It's not. I don't know what to add to that. I wish I could add something more encouraging, but just trust me. The video, the series still looks like it was made yesterday. It's just a gorgeous achievement.
Yeah. Well, 20 years ago, I was 20 pounds lighter and I had a full head of blonde hair.
Well, Tony, I want you to know that, I've been following your whole Becoming Desert Rat video series, of course. And the timing couldn't be weirder because I have just started within the last 2 weeks consistently. I've been doing my own rigorous cardio regimen just to generally get into shape. And I'm like, well, that's a weird coincidence. Like, I started this for my own health, and Tony is literally video documenting. And there was no connection there. It wasn't like you started your series and I'm like, I should get into shape. It was like, I was just doing it on my own. And there you go. And now that you're doing it, I'm like, yeah, I can't quit now. I have to. I have to.
I blame Bobby Vella.
Yeah.
Thanks, Bobby.
Yeah. Bobby Collins says, I wonder what it would have sounded like if Jimmy Stewart was complaining about wearing a scarf and coat in the summer. Well, it would have been hot. It just would have been just ridiculously hot. I mean, why? Why are we doing this? The movie business is weird. Yeah. So I said, so again, I'm gonna start putting $1 in a jar for every time I say this. So the
episode points is, I want to say that this is my favorite episode. It's brilliantly done, the way it all kind of wraps up at the end and the conclusion. I think having Winters narrates this episode.
Yes.
Damian Lewis's narration is, his entire performance is just brilliant. There's something really special to me about this episode. Like if I haven't discussed Band of Brothers in a while and someone's, it comes up in conversation, the first things that pop into my head are taking over the German guns at Breakor. And particularly that shot of Buck Compton dropping his helmet in the snow is that image is seared into my mind. But this episode is brilliantly done. I will, it's probably my favorite episode. And I'm not saying it's the best episode in the series, and it's my personal favorite. I like the way, they deal with sort of wrapping up storyline. Sounds odd when you're talking about a true historical document, but a lot of that is done through Winter's narration. But it's also depictive of some of the crazy stuff that happens in war and how dangerous it is just to be in the service, even when the war's over. So we hear stories of a number of the sharpshooter, Shifty Powers. Yes. You don't see it with Shifty Powers, but Winter's narration says that, he gets into a car accident or a vehicle accident on his way to the rear and ends up in traction for months. You see another trooper killed in an accident. So
yeah, Shifty wins the lottery because they're just going to pick somebody at random to get to go home, regardless of their points. And Shifty wins that lottery, and he never got a scratch the whole war. And then on the way back to the rear, the truck he was riding in gets in this horrible accident. And he didn't make it back to the States before a lot of the guys that didn't win the lottery. Because he was in the hospital for so long, just trying to, relearn everything. There's this beautiful moment after he wins that lottery where he's talking to Winters and trying to get some advice from Winters because of his feelings on everything, because he knows he's going home and he hasn't been around his family in years, and he's just been through all this stuff. I had to edit this down a little bit because if you see it in the original version, there's these, it's allowed to act and it's allowed to breathe, but I had to get some of the dialogue in there. But there's this moment right here where he's saying goodbye to Winters. I just want to play it.
I just don't rightly know how I'm going to explain all this. I seen.
You're a hell of a fine soldier, Shifty. There's nothing more to explain.
And it's this moment where he's trying to express for us, the viewer, something that a lot of the soldiers in World War II and soldiers in combat in general, they don't know how they're going to relate to people when they get home. People who haven't been a part of this, they have no idea. Like he's like, I have seen things that they won't be able to wrap their heads around, and it reminds me of, he's asking Winters, how do I explain it? And then Winters, of course, tells him, you don't have to explain it. You're a good soldier, and that's all that matters, which was the attitude that many of the World War II guys took when they went home. I'm reminded of a moment in the commentary for Rambo 4. At the very beginning, it's the Sly Stallone commentary where they're showing some of the real footage from Burma, now known as Myanmar, and they're showing some of the atrocities and talking about what happened in sort of real news footage. And Sylvester Stallone says in the research we did and talking to the Karen people, he said there were things that were done in this war to these people that not only could non-combatants not wrap their head around who live in peaceful nations, he said, but the Western mind couldn't wrap their heads around it. He goes, I literally wouldn't have been able to show it and have people believe it. And that's kind of what I think of when I see Shifty talking to Winters this way. He's like, I've seen things that nobody would know what to do if I told them about it. I don't know. Yeah. I find that very powerful. That whole moment right there, I find it very powerful.
I can really relate to it. When I was doing private security work in Iraq, I was kind of working I would do 3 months in Iraq and then have a month off, and I was originally I'd be in Iraq for 3 months. I would come back to Perth for a month, and often I wouldn't tell my family I was coming back, and I would land at Perth airport and I'd go and get a hotel room somewhere and get ridiculously drunk because I would abstain from alcohol when I was in Iraq.
Right.
I'd be home for 3 or 4 days before I would even let my parents know that I was actually back in the country, because I needed time to decompress. And it got to the point for me after a while that I couldn't come back here anymore because I couldn't relate to anyone. And that is how I ended up going to live in Thailand instead, because I had a lot of other friends there in Thailand. So I would work with them in Iraq and then come back and spend my downtime with them instead of my family. And fortunately for me, I ended up with Grace, who she was a friend of kind of the whole community. So she knows she knows my veteran friends better than anyone else in my life, which is something that's really helped us form a strong bond. But I really relate to that, being able to, it got to the point where I couldn't come home anymore.
Yeah.
because I felt too out of place. I couldn't talk to people. I couldn't relate. It's taken me a long time. And it's really been my wife that's helped me do that. But yeah, I know how he feels.
Yeah.
You can't explain that stuff to people.
Right. And
probably even more so back then when you think, at least in this day and age, we have TV shows like Band of Brothers that give people some kind of an insight. Back in the 1940s, there was no frame of reference for people.
No, there's not. And especially on that scale. I mean, there's a whole population coming back to these various countries from being abroad. Yeah. And they're now totally different and permanently changed from the people they were when they left. Scale Hanger, thank you for the question. He says, what do you guys think about the Pacific? We will be talking about the Pacific in a future installment of this live stream. So you will hear our thoughts at a certain point in the near future. Blake Romo, thank you for the super chat. He says, either of you two had trouble breathing, getting back to exercising? I don't know if it's from wearing masks at work for 2 years, but I started coughing. No, that's not uncommon. You're training your lungs. You're getting them. You're increasing your lung capacity again. It's not uncommon. I wouldn't panic. Just make sure you're not coughing up any blood. You're fine. That might be something you need to follow up with a doctor on. There is a bit of narration from Winters in this episode. What you were talking about a second ago, Tony, where you said that sometimes just the life of a soldier is more dangerous or as dangerous as being in combat, which Winters alludes to, where he says, what do you do with all these guys who have plenty of liquor and plenty of ammo and they have no war to fight anymore? And things are going to start happening. Some of the things are totally random and don't involve anything bad. For example, you alluded to Tom Hardy's character who'd been with them all the way through from Toccoa all the way forward. And he gets relieved on a traffic detail checkpoint by Webster, hops in the Jeep to go back to the CP, and this is what happens.
Go ahead, take off. It's my turn.
Okay, see you back at the farm.
Oh, Jesus.
I mean, and he died. I mean, that's true to history. He got killed in a random Jeep accident over nothing, and the war was over. I mean, they were just directing traffic and checking people's papers and making sure they knew where they were going, and then he got killed, and it's tragic. It's just the other thing that they were doing, Tony. You know this from watching the episode, because they had the whole guns thing going on. They had loaded rifles and a lot of liquor and nothing to do. Grant he encounters a guy who shot. He was a GI on the road at night, and he shot, I guess, some German civilians in a car, killed him. And when Grant is trying to talk the guy down, the guy shoots him in the head. Yeah. And so the Toccoa guys have to take him, basically wake up a German neurosurgeon in the middle of the night and demand that he save their friend. And in the meantime, they have to go find this guy who shot Grant. And then Spears finds out where the guys are holding him and beating the snot out of him. And I had to edit this down a little bit for time, but here's a little bit of this moment.
That's him. That's him. Replacement.
Have the MPs take care of this piece of shit.
The guy was a replacement. He'd never been in combat. He was literally dropped in there to help fill the ranks, and he ended up shooting in a drunken, stupor, one of their Toccoa guys. I cannot imagine, and that actually happened. I cannot imagine the amount of rage that would come from that. I can't imagine.
What's really interesting here, though, is Captain Spears. You know, we've been discussing it all through the whole from episode 2 all the way through. Is this, you know, the guys talk about Spears behind his back because they say he shot one of his own guys for refusing to go on a patrol. He shot all these German POWs. And then here we are with a guy who's shot Sergeant Grant and he chooses not to kill him. And that's because, you know, they somehow find a German brain surgeon. And I think his last comment to the guys as he walks out says, nope, the Kraut surgeon says he's going to make it. So I don't know if he decides not to kill this guy because Grant's going to live and, you know, an eye for an eye is not, you know, well, he's not going to die, you're not going to die. Or perhaps Spears was just over it by that point of the war.
Smuggler's Canyon has an interesting comment here. He says a British officer was also killed by the same man. Apparently, it was a larger situation, but they shortened it for the show. Yeah. So it's very possible that a serial killing sociopath joined the army and suddenly found his calling and was causing all kinds of problems there at the end of the war.
I was talking just before about when I would come home from Iraq and I would spend a few days in a hotel and I would get really, really drunk because I would abstain from alcohol.
Right.
I wouldn't allow anyone within my team. I mean, alcohol was very hard to get in Iraq anyway because it's a Muslim country. It was a dry country, but you know, you can still get stuff there. You know, I mean, on the black market, you could buy an AK-47 for $80 over there.
Right.
But I wouldn't. You know, we would do 3 months at a time, and then the guys would get a month's leave. It was not necessary for them to drink alcohol, but I didn't want to have anyone drunk when they were actually carrying loaded weapons around. You know, guys will have drunken arguments, and what's going to happen? And there is a guy from he worked for a different private security company. I had come across him, but I want to say around 2009, he was involved in a drunken argument at a villa inside the Green Zone in Baghdad. And he shot and killed an ex-British paratrooper over some ridiculous drunken argument. And then he ended up in Abu Ghraib prison. And it's alcohol and soldiers and firearms.
Yeah.
Don't mix.
Yeah.
Soldiers love to, you know, they say train hard, party hard. But when the party hard part of it comes, all the weapons should be locked up in the armory. That's how I've always wanted it done. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Let's see. They claim that they're now filming Masters of the Air after 15 years after the Pacific. I'm not going to hold my breath, but they say they're filming it now, but they've been saying that in articles for like 15 years. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Let's see. There's some interesting information here. It says he killed a British major having flagged his car down on the road after crashing the Jeep he'd been driving. Wow. So he was a psycho. And then we have this little moment here where I shouldn't say little moment. This is actually a big deal. It gets back to the whole thing about sometimes it's not a drunk guy with a gun. Sometimes it's just a soldier with a gun who feels like there's unfinished business. And Leapgot was, if you'd like to take this, Tony, feel free.
Yeah. So, you know, they hint at this in the Crossroads episode. So Leapgot is one of the translators. He speaks German. He's also Jewish. And after the engagement with the SS at the Crossroads, we see Leapgot basically, while everyone else is trying to kind of organizing the German prisoners, Leapgot's just laying in the prone position, just taking pot shots at, you know, wounded German soldiers. And so that's when Winters, you know, makes him march them all back with only one round in his rifle. Well, you know, you pick up that, hey, this guy really doesn't like Germans. Then, of course, he comes across the the death camp. He learns that the main reason they're there, they're Jews, Poles, Gypsies, the unwanted. He's the one who's given the task of telling them that they have to keep them locked up for a while longer and all of that. So that there's all this been building up. And then in this episode, he gets tasked to go and, with a couple of other guys, Webster and some other kind of private, to go and visit a German officer who, rumor has it, is a former camp commandant of some kind.
Right. And it's even questionable as to whether or not they're officially on orders to do it, or if Liepgott just heard through the rumor mill that this guy is the guy. And I've edited this down a little bit to give everybody the main idea.
What if this guy's just a soldier? What if he's an officer with no ties to the SS? What if he's innocent?
You know what? What if he's a fucking Nazi commandant of a fucking slave camp?
Which one? Which camp? You don't have any proof.
Shoot him!
No.
Because they go into his house and they start harassing him, specifically Liepgott, and he insists that he's not what they're saying he is, and he tries to run away, and Liepgott's 1911 jams, and it won't operate. And so the other guy, the third guy that's with them, ends up taking that shot and killing that guy. And according to Winters, these incidents happened after VE Day. There was a kind of vigilante justice going on in a lot of areas in Germany at that time. But interestingly enough, despite those things happening, those things of questionable action, we do have a moment here where, and this is another slight inaccuracy in one way, a major inaccuracy in another, no pun intended. A German colonel surrenders to Winters and surrenders his troops to Winters. In reality, this was a major, and it was a German major, not a colonel. And I'll play the clip, and then we'll talk about the rest of it here.
Yep.
Please accept this as my formal surrender, Major.
You may keep your sidearm, Colonel.
One, in reality, that wasn't a colonel. It was, I believe, a German major. Secondly, he offered the weapon to Winters as a sign of peace, and it was a Walther PP, and Winters kept that PP his whole life, and he noticed that pistol had never been fired. He could tell the pistol had left the factory. It had never been used, and he never used it even recreationally his whole life. It's an odd choice that they made, where they decided to up that guy's rank to colonel and then also do this thing where Winters lets him keep his pistol. I'm not really sure why they did that. Tony, what would you say is the reason they changed that?
I've often wondered this, because after the final episode, there is, of course, the documentary where all the interviews, and in that Major Winters actually shows the pistol, and he says something along the lines of, that's the way all wars should end, with an agreement that has no blood on it. And he talks about the fact that they traded this pistol that had never been fired. So when you watch that add-on documentary with all the interviews, you think, hang on, in the show he let him keep his pistol, and here he's saying he kept the pistol. I don't know if they were trying to make Major Winters look somewhat chivalrous. They didn't need to by that point. Yeah. They didn't need to do any of it. That's a really odd choice to me.
Yeah,
I don't know. I've never been able to figure out why they did that.
It's very strange, and it also loses us an opportunity to see a German officer do something with some introspection and nobility that actually happened in the war, where he's like, I give this to you as a sign that hostilities are over, and I never want to fire a gun again. I never want to be a part of anything like this ever again. The funny footnote to that is that in reality, after that, Winters in his memoirs makes this kind of bemused joke that in typical German fashion, when we ordered them to hand over in this field the location where we said you will deposit all of your weapons here, they took that to the last letter. The Germans are as efficient and by the book as they are. They went and they found when the Americans went over there and saw them deposit all the weapons, the Germans didn't just deposit all their military gear. They cleared the town out of every hunting rifle, every like hunting knife, every short of like a bread knife. They took everything there that was deadly, that was like a hand weapon, and dropped it in that field, which Winters said was kind of, amusing in a sense. They made the town truly safe from German attack. I don't remember where this falls, but I think it's somewhere during the surrender of the German battalion or garrison or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And it's the guy who played Dietrich in Raiders of the Lost Ark playing the German commanding officer, the German general. They encounter Sobel once again.
And this is right near the end of the episode, and a very satisfying moment for Winters, Nixon, the audience. And actually my favorite GIF of all time, I send this to you quite often, don't I? Yeah.
Here's the moment.
We salute the rank, not the man.
He's still bitter. He's still bitter about it all. Gosh. Well, now that we're at the very end, I have one more clip here to show that you sent, and I had to cut it into various bits. But before we talk about this scene, I don't know how to get this question out, Tony, but it's like you said, it's hard for a show like Band of Brothers, which is based on a historical series of events, to really have an ending, so much as we have to tie up this set of their experiences. Like this is the end of their experiences in this part of their life. And given everything they focused on, what do you think of the baseball ending to the show?
It's perfect because it was something that actually did happen. They got together for this baseball game. Buck Compton comes back to see the guys, and the way it is written, performed, and shot, it would bring almost tears of joy to my eye when I would watch it, because you learn of the people who did finally make it through the war, and and were able to go back home and prosper, and you kind of get told who all the people are. And then basically the whole way through this show, when they show the interview clips with the real men, you never know who is who.
Right.
And kind of after this ends, then all of a sudden you're seeing these guys again, telling us some more stories. But then the names start to appear, and you're like, that's Major Winters, that's Bill Garnier, and all these guys who survived. How do you feel about that whole baseball thing? I think that is expertly done. I mean, Damian Lewis's narration is perfect. I could listen to that guy talk all day.
Oh yeah, it's perfectly performed, and it's very well executed. And I know because it happened in history, it's appropriate for it to be there. It brings up for me issues that I have with other World War II productions. For example, Memphis Belle, where they unnecessarily fictionalized that entire movie. when in point of fact, much like Band of Brothers, what happened to them after they left the not area of operations. What am I talking? I'm losing my words. Theater of operations.
Yeah.
After they left the theater of operations and went back to the United States to assist with the Army mandated war bond tour, a lot more stuff happened. And then after that, they all went on their separate lives. And I'm sitting there and I'm going, when I see Band of Brothers handle it so well and leaning on actual historical people that had lives and experiences that were just as, if not more interesting infinitely than fictionalized fake history, because Memphis Belle in many ways is kind of a proto Private Ryan, where you have a movie that is completely fiction, but for a few window dressing pieces, much like Private Ryan's Omaha Beach scene. They fictionalize every name, they fictionalize every incident, but then at the very end, they're like, oh, and then the Memphis Belle went home and on a war, and it did, and some of that is actually true. So it messes with the mind of an ignorant audience. So my point in saying all that is, I think that this Band of Brothers ending handles it as well as any historical piece could. Yeah.
And I think its advantage is the fact that this is a 10-part miniseries and not a film. Going right back to the very start of this 3-4 week journey that I'm so pleased that you and I have gone on together. I've actually rewatched a number of these episodes, or the last 2 that we've done. I've watched them more than once. I don't normally do that with my live streams, but this is something special and something that I think I may revisit this show you and I have done together every 12 months, like I do the series Band of Brothers.
Yeah, so you can see me. You can see me say Belgium over and over again when we're actually in Holland, because I've got Belgium on my mind for many reasons right now. Yeah, that's good stuff.
But I think I said at the start of the very first episode that to me there is no such thing as a good war film. There are films that depict battles. A war is, it's a drawn out, protracted conflict that goes over years. America only left Afghanistan, last year? We've been there for 20 years.
Right. Yeah.
You can't put that into a 2-hour movie. It doesn't work. So there are films that do a good job of depicting battles. They don't depict wars very well, with some very odd exceptions. This is the best war experience ever committed to film. Is this 10-part miniseries? So
yeah,
I think it has an almost perfect ending. That baseball game was the perfect place to end it, and to have Winters narrate it all, and you learn about that David Webster, wrote a book about sharks, and the Saturday, he was a journalist for the Saturday Evening Post, and he went out on the ocean alone in the 1950s and was never seen again. And who was it? Buck Compton prosecuted Sirhan.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, that's correct. And Spears went on to become the he was like the commanding officer at the German prison where they kept all the war criminals for a while. Yeah,
he was governor of Spandau Prison.
Just fascinating stuff. I mean, and of course, it's equally fascinating to see the guys that went back into civilian life and all that kind of stuff as well. But and I have some select clips here strung together of the baseball ending. It doesn't do it justice because I'd get copyright struck out of nowhere if I tried to play the whole thing. And you guys who haven't seen it should definitely watch it out there who are in the chat. But here's just a selection from the baseball ending.
George Luz became a handyman in Providence, Rhode Island. As a testament to his character, 1,600 people attended his funeral in 1998. Carwood Lipton became a glass-making executive in charge of factories all over the world. He has a nice life in North Carolina. There is not a day that goes by that I do not think of the men I served with who never got to enjoy the world without war.
And I messed up the last clip and didn't format it properly. Yeah, sorry about that. I don't know how that happened. These things are going to happen. They're going to occur in this series as we go along. Sorry about that. I usually triple check everything. I'd like to point out that this is the first mistake like that I've had in this whole series. So give me some credit out there, everybody. Give me some credit.
And look, for the audience, I want to kind of back up what Michael's saying here. I remember when we collaborated with 2 Cents Toys for Star Wars Follies, All Tied Up.
Mm-hmm.
Michael exported the video, shared it with me and Sal first, and there was a single drop frame in it where the screen went black for, 1 frame. What is it? 25 frames per second.
Yeah.
There was a single drop frame, and Michael was not happy with that, and he had to go back, fix the mistake, re-export, re-upload. So that's the kind of professional that we're dealing with here.
And I will make a pledge, because this is an ongoing series. So War Stories is going to be an ongoing series. So there's going to be a kind of meta continuity between each episode, even if we're moving on to a new movie entirely or a new subject matter or whatever. At the beginning of the next episode, whatever it is, whatever we're talking about, you can be rest assured I'm going to play that clip again, and it's going to be correct. So just to remind us where we came from. I don't know how that happened, but I'm going to fix it, and it's going to be correct. So Kieran,
Melinda liked it. She said it made it feel artsy.
No, it just made me feel like, oh, of course I missed one clip in the whole export. And then Wolfie says, "That's fine. I'll throw off the stupid algorithm more." That's true. That's true. So what is, Tony, do we have a definitive idea of what our next discussion will be for a war film or TV show?
Well, I was thinking about it because I was listening to your live stream the other day, and you said to the audience you were keen to step away from World War II for the next one. And so am I. So I would like to put you on the spot right now and say, here's 2 choices. Take your pick.
Okay.
Zulu or Four Feathers.
Oh, that's so mean, because they're both so good. You know what? I think as much as I love Four Feathers, I feel like we need to show people Zulu first.
Yep.
The reason I say that is because I think generally more people have heard of Zulu, and after they see us talk about Zulu, they'll trust us when we bring up Four Feathers as an episode. I think Zulu is like Band of Brothers. It will help us build trust with our audience, that even if they haven't heard of Four Feathers, they'll still tune in and watch the discussion. Does that make sense? Like,
yes, it does.
Oh man, I love Four Feathers. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. I'm so mad that the only Blu-ray available is in Germany, and the German, I own it, but the German subtitles are forced onto the screen. So it's like I can watch it in high def if I like German subtitles. But yeah, I think we should do Zulu next. I think that'd be a great one to do. Okay.
That would be wonderful. That was Star Wars for my father's generation. I'm not saying in any way that Zulu is like Star Wars. What I'm saying is, in Britain, when it came out, it was that kind of a phenomenon. It was this massive. It was the blockbuster before there were blockbusters in the United Kingdom, and I look forward to that.
I do too. We will do that on the next whenever we decide the next one's going to be. I guess it'll be Friday after 2 weeks from today. Jesse, I believe there are actually 3 versions of the Four Feathers, if I recall, because they go back quite a ways. We're referring to the Heath Ledger version.
Heath Ledger and Wes Bentley, I think it is.
Yes, Wes Bentley, Jaimin Unsu, and Kate Hudson. I want to make something clear, guys. Tony and I have had extensive discussions in the background about this series regarding how we're going to handle. Because it's not because we don't have a problem watching black and white war films. I love them myself, but we also know that there's as this hopefully will grow, this show will grow, this series. There's a lot of people that have a prejudice against black and white movies, and we're trying to build enthusiasm and trust up front so that we can safely occasionally do a black and white film. And so like an original Four Feathers version, I'd be happy to explore. I would love to explore something like that. But it's going to take the audience having confidence in knowing that no matter what episode I tune in for, I'm going to enjoy myself. And so I think for this first Four Feathers foray, when it happens, the more modern one will be the one to start with. But that's just my instinct. I could be wrong. You guys say in the comments whether or not I've lost my mind.
And look, for me, any excuse to talk about a beloved West Australian named Heath Ledger, who's sadly no longer with us. I don't need an excuse to talk about Heath Ledger.
We also have a request here. Cromer says he would love to hear why we both dislike Private Ryan at some point.
Oh, you're definitely going to hear that. We think we may only move away from World War II just for the next episode.
Right.
You need to understand we've talked for 6 hours now over the course of a month about a very, a long World War II series that we both adore. I think Zulu is the perfect palate cleanser, so to speak. And who knows where we'll go from there? Maybe when we come back to World War II, we'll do fiction. We'll do Where Eagles Dare.
Love Where Eagles Dare. Oh, I love Where Eagles Dare. That was where I discovered Ingrid Pitt, and she's never looked better. She's never looked better. She looks great in everything she was in, but she's never looked better than Where Eagles Dare. Wolfie, thank you for the super chat. He says, "Oh yeah, that reminds me. I got to get the Criterion of Citizen Kane. I hear the sepia tone is effing amazing in 4K. Fantastic chat, guys. You're welcome. Thanks for being here."
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, all right, everybody. We will see you in 2 weeks' time. Same bat channel, same bat time. And we will be discussing Zulu with Michael Caine. So we'll see.
I'm looking forward to it already.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Tony and I will see you in 2 Fridays.
Yep.
Bye.